Barron Trump pretends to be homeless. The mayor's cruelty is exposed for the world to see. Barron Trump adjusted the oversized hoodie covering his face as he walked through the bustling streets of Park Hill Plaza, the wealthiest district in the city. Luxury stores lined both sides of the sidewalk, their pristine glass windows displaying watches, suits, and handbags that cost more than most people made in a year. But Barron wasn't here to shop. He was here to observe. He had heard the stories, how the rich ignored the poor, how people looked away when they saw suffering. But he didn't just want to hear about it. He wanted to see it for himself. Dressed in ragged clothes, his face smudged with dirt, he blended in with the city's forgotten souls. And sure enough, as he walked past the cafes and boutiques, he saw it happen. People avoided eye contact. Some stepped aside as if he carried a disease. Others whispered, their faces twisted in disgust. The real world. Barron felt every stare. Then he spotted something up ahead. A press conference in the middle of the plaza. A podium, cameras, a crowd gathering. And at the center of it all, Mayor Richard Lasker. A powerful man, always smiling for the cameras. But Barron knew the truth. Lasker didn't care about the people. He cared about his image. Barron moved closer, staying within the crowd. That's when the mayor spotted him. His polished smile faltered. His gaze hardened. "What is this?" Lasker muttered into his mic, glancing toward security. "Someone let a vagrant wander into my event?" Barron stayed silent, waiting. The cameras turned toward him. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people laughed. Others simply watched, entertained. Lasker stepped forward, sneering. "You think you belong here?" Barron remained still. Lasker scoffed. "This is a place for respectable people. Not freeloaders begging for handouts." The laughter grew. Barron clenched his jaw. "Where's security?" the mayor barked. "Get him out of here." Barron held his ground. And just as the security guards reached for him, he took off his hood. The crowd gasped. Lasker froze. And in that moment, everything changed. The moment Barron pulled back his hood, silence swallowed the crowd. The smug laughter died instantly, replaced by murmurs of confusion and shock. Mayor Lasker blinked, his face pale as if he had just seen a ghost. He knew. He knew exactly who stood before him. Barron straightened his posture, his piercing gaze locked onto the man who had just humiliated him. The prey had now become the predator. "Surprised to see me?" Barron's voice was calm, but the weight behind it shook the entire plaza. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered into their microphones. The son of the former president had just been exposed in disguise. Lasker took an awkward step back. He looked at his security team, as if expecting them to do something. But no one moved. No one dared. The mayor had insulted the son of one of the most powerful families in the country. And worse? He had done it in front of live cameras. Barron let the tension settle before speaking again. "It's funny," he mused, his voice cutting through the hushed crowd. "You had no problem treating me like garbage when you thought I was homeless. Now you're quiet?" Lasker's lips parted, but no words came out. His mind was scrambling for an escape, for damage control. Barron tilted his head, glancing toward the cameras. "I wonder," he continued, "what the people watching at home think about a mayor who humiliates the homeless?" The whispers grew louder. A few of the wealthier guests in the audience stepped away from Lasker, distancing themselves. This wasn't just an embarrassment. This was a disaster. One of the reporters finally found the courage to step forward, microphone in hand. "Mr. Trump, why were you disguised as a homeless man?" Barron turned toward the camera, his expression sharp. "Because I wanted to see the truth," he said. "And the truth is, people like Lasker don't see the homeless as people. They see them as obstacles." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lasker clenched his fists. "That's not true," he snapped. "I have done plenty for this city." Barron raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because all I saw today was a man who mocked someone he assumed was beneath him." Lasker's nostrils flared. He was losing control. A second reporter spoke up. "Mayor Lasker, what do you have to say about your treatment of the homeless today?" I didn't know," Lasker stammered. "This was a misunderstanding." Barron smirked. Oh, so if I were actually homeless, it wouldn't be a misunderstanding? It would just be acceptable? The crowd murmured in agreement. Lasker's forehead beaded with sweat. That's not what I meant. Barron took a slow step forward. Then what did you mean? Lasker had no answer. Because the truth was out. The entire country had just witnessed his cruelty, and they would never forget it. The weight of Barron's words hung thick in the air. Every eye in the crowd was on him. Every camera was rolling. The mayor, once so arrogant and untouchable, now stood frozen in place, his career unraveling before his eyes. Barron took another step forward, his gaze locked onto Lasker. You treated me like trash, he said, his voice sharp and deliberate. But what about the people who don't have the privilege of unmasking themselves? What about the real homeless individuals you humiliate every day? The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Reporters jotted down notes, whispers of, "This is going to be all over the news." The cameras zoomed in on Lasker's sweating face. I don't humiliate them, Lasker sputtered, his usual composure crumbling. I have initiatives. I donate. Barron laughed coldly. Donate? That's funny, because when I checked, the city's homeless shelters were underfunded and half of your budget for social services mysteriously disappeared. Lasker's eyes widened. Where did you hear that? Barron took out his phone. Right here, he said smoothly, flipping the screen to show an investigative report from independent journalists. Records show that Mayor Lasker approved a $5 million cut from the city's homeless relief fund last year, Barron continued, his voice steady. And where did that money go? A reporter shouted, wasn't that the year you funded a personal security upgrade for your office, Mr. Mayor? Lasker's face drained of color. The crowd erupted. More questions. More accusations. People who once supported him were now turning away. And Barron wasn't done. You want to talk about respect? Barron said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Respect is earned through actions, not words. And today, the world saw who you really are. Lasker's hands trembled. He looked at his aides, at security, but no one was coming to save him. Then, Barron made his move. He stepped onto the podium, taking the mayor's place. The moment was symbolic. The once powerful man was now pushed aside by the very person he had just insulted. Barron turned to the cameras. This city doesn't need men like Lasker, he said, his voice filled with purpose. This city needs real leadership. It needs people who care about the ones society has abandoned. People cheered. Lasker took a step back, his world collapsing. This isn't over, he whispered under his breath. Barron barely glanced at him. Oh, it is, he said coolly. Then he dropped the final bombshell. I'll personally be working with organizations to fund a new program for the homeless. One that doesn't depend on corrupt politicians, Barron announced. And I will make sure every dollar stolen from the people of this city is accounted for. The crowd roared. Reporters were already typing their headlines. Lasker knew it. His career was finished. Barron had exposed him for the world to see. And there was nothing he could do about it. Lasker's breathing was ragged as the crowd closed in on him, not physically, but with their judgment. Their disapproving stares, their whispers of betrayal, their phones recording every twitch of his face. He had been exposed. Not by a political rival, not by a scandalous leak, but by a single young man who had seen the truth for himself. Barron Trump stood tall, unwavering, his presence dominating the scene. The power dynamic had shifted. Lasker was no longer in control. The mayor clenched his fists. This is slander, he muttered, forcing out a weak chuckle. You have no real proof? Barron raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. No proof? He turned his phone around again, displaying a spreadsheet of financial transactions. The numbers were undeniable. Millions funneled away from homeless relief, redirected to private expenses under Lasker's administration. The audience gasped. Where did you get that? Lasker's voice cracked. Barron smirked. Let's just say you left a trail. A reporter stepped forward. Mr. Trump, are you saying you have evidence that Mayor Lasker embezzled funds from the city? I'm not saying it, Barron said, letting the data on his phone do the talking. The numbers are. The reporter immediately turned to Lasker. Mayor Lasker, do you deny these allegations? Lasker's face twisted. He opened his mouth, searching for a way out. But there was none. People had already started calling for an investigation. Another reporter spoke up, shoving a microphone toward Lasker. Sir, do you plan on resigning? Lasker's composure cracked completely. This is ridiculous, he barked. You can't believe a kid over a sitting mayor. Barron crossed his arms. A kid? Lasker realized his mistake too late. Barron leaned in, his voice calm but firm. You mean to tell me that a kid was able to expose your entire operation in a single afternoon? The crowd erupted in laughter. Lasker went pale. His reputation was crumbling by the second. Then, a voice cut through the noise. This man doesn't deserve to be our mayor. The crowd turned toward the speaker. An older man in worn-out clothes stepped forward. His face was weathered with age and hardship, his hands rough from years of struggle. A homeless man. One of the very people Lasker had ignored. People like me have been suffering for years, the man said. You cut our shelters, ignored our cries for help, and today? You made fun of someone just because you thought he was one of us. A woman stepped up next to him. My brother died on the streets last year because there weren't enough beds in the shelters. And now we know why. Because you took the money for yourself. Lasker's mouth hung open. This wasn't just a PR nightmare. This was an uprising. The people were done with him. And then a chant started. Resign. 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 Lasker's panic was visible now. His forehead glistened with sweat, his lips trembling. He looked around wildly, but his aides were already slipping away, not wanting to go down with him. He was alone. Barron stepped forward one last time, his voice loud and clear. This city deserves better than corruption and cruelty, he said. And from today onward, things are going to change. The crowd cheered. And Mayor Lasker? He turned and fled the scene, his career shattered beyond repair. Lasker's hasty retreat was captured by every camera in the plaza. His once confident stride had turned into a hurried, disgraced escape, his polished shoes clacking against the pavement as he shoved past reporters and aides who no longer wanted to be associated with him. As he disappeared into a black sedan that sped away, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. But Barron wasn't focused on the fallen mayor. His gaze swept across the people who had stepped forward, the homeless, the forgotten, the ones who had suffered under Lasker's reign. This wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about fixing the damage. Barron turned to the older man who had spoken out moments before. What's your name? The man hesitated before answering. Frank. Barron extended his hand. You were brave today, Frank. Frank blinked in surprise before shaking his hand. Someone had to say it. Barron nodded. And someone has to fix it. He turned back to the cameras, his decision already made. This city has failed its people for too long, Barron said. And we're not waiting for another corrupt politician to come in and make empty promises. The crowd fell silent, listening. I'm launching a city-wide program to address homelessness. Real solutions, not just talk. A reporter immediately raised a microphone. Mr. Trump, do you plan on running for office? Barron let out a small chuckle. I don't need a title to make a difference. A second reporter stepped forward. And how exactly do you plan to fund this initiative? Barron's expression was calm but determined. The same way real change always happens, with action. Then he turned back to Frank. Tell me, what do you need? Frank hesitated, glancing around at the other homeless individuals who had gathered. Shelters. Food. A chance to get back on our feet. Barron nodded. Then that's what we'll do. The city was buzzing. After the downfall of Mayor Lasker, the media had been in a frenzy. Investigations were launched, audits revealed shocking levels of fraud, and within days, his name had become synonymous with disgrace. But Barron? Barron was making moves. Headlines were already calling it. Police car light Barron Trump launches citywide homeless reform, without government help. Police car light. He had partnered with private donors, high-profile businessmen, and even his own family to secure the first phase of funding. And now, he was standing inside the first newly renovated homeless shelter, a place that would provide safety, warmth, and resources to those who needed it most. Frank was the first person through the doors. Barron greeted him personally. "Welcome home." Frank's eyes welled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." Barron shook his head. "You don't need to. Just pay it forward." Frank smiled for the first time in years. The impact was undeniable. Barron's initiative had already housed over 1,000 homeless individuals. Job training programs were set up, mental health services provided, and people who had once been ignored now had hope. One night, as Barron was reviewing reports in his office, he received a message from an unknown number. He hesitated before opening it. "Unknown, you changed my life. Thank you." No name. No details. Just a message of gratitude. Barron leaned back in his chair, exhaling. This was just the beginning. And he wasn't stopping anytime soon. The city was unrecognizable. Where once there had been crumbling shelters, now stood modern community centers. Where people had once slept under bridges, now they had safe housing, education, and employment programs. And at the heart of it all, Barron Trump. His initiative, the Second Chance Project, had grown into a nationwide movement. Cities across the country had reached out, asking for guidance, for funding, for partnerships. But for Barron, it wasn't about recognition. It was about the people whose lives had changed. Like Frank. A year ago, Frank had been another forgotten man on the street. But he was the head coordinator of one of the largest shelters in the city. "You're sure about this?" Frank asked, standing beside Barron as they overlooked a crowd gathered in front of the newest facility. Barron smiled. "It's yours now." Frank shook his head. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," Barron said. "This was never supposed to be about me." Frank sighed, his voice thick with emotion. "You know, when you first walked up to me, I thought you were just another rich kid playing a game." Barron chuckled. "To be fair, I wasn't exactly dressed like one." Frank smirked. "No, but you carried yourself differently. There was something about you." He exhaled deeply. "I just never thought someone like you would actually care." Barron grew serious. "That's the problem, isn't it?" Frank nodded. People assumed those with power would never use it to help. But Barron had proven them wrong. And he wasn't done yet. Barron sat in his office, staring at his phone. He had been receiving thousands of messages since his movement had begun. Messages from people thanking him, from people asking for help, from people wanting to be part of something bigger than themselves. But one message stood out. It was from a private number. The text was short. "I underestimated you." Barron smirked. No name, no sender. But he already knew who it was. Mayor Richard Lasker. The man who had once mocked him, dismissed him, tried to humiliate him in front of the world. But Lasker was nothing but a disgraced politician. His career had ended in scandal, lawsuits, and disgrace. Meanwhile, Barron had rebuilt the very city Lasker had destroyed. Poetic justice. But Barron didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because while Lasker had been busy falling from power, Barron had been changing lives. And there was no greater revenge than that. The ribbon was cut. The audience erupted in applause. Barron stood in front of the largest housing and rehabilitation center in the country, the final piece of a project that had taken years to build. He turned to Frank, who was now a leader in the movement. "We did it," Barron said. Frank shook his head. "You did it." Barron smiled. "No," he said. "We did." As he looked out over the city he had helped transform, he knew this was just the beginning. Because change wasn't about power or politics. It was about doing what was right. And Barron Trump had done exactly that. The sun rose over the city skyline, casting golden light over streets that once housed the forgotten. Now, those same streets were filled with people who had found hope again. Barron Trump stood atop the newest development project, gazing down at the place that had once been a symbol of corruption and failure. Now, it was a beacon of change. The Second Chance Project had evolved far beyond what anyone had imagined. It wasn't just about housing anymore. It was about full-scale rehabilitation, mental health support, financial education, and job placement. It was about restoring dignity. And it had worked. The data showed it. Homelessness had dropped by 60% in the city. Other cities were following Barron's model. And today, something even bigger was happening. Barron turned as a black SUV approached. The door opened, and out stepped a figure he hadn't seen in years. Melania Trump. His mother's elegant features softened as she took in the sight before her. She had supported him quietly, watching from a distance as he built something that no one had expected. But today, she had come to see it for herself. She approached Barron with pride in her eyes. "You've built something extraordinary," she said softly. Barron exhaled. "I didn't do it alone." She nodded, glancing at the people bustling in and out of the facility. "They said you were too young," she murmured. "That you wouldn't last." Barron smirked. "They said that about a lot of people in our family." Melania chuckled. "Yes, they did." Barron turned back to the project. "This is just the beginning." His mother studied him for a moment. "And what's next?" Barron didn't answer right away. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure. He had transformed a city. But there was so much more to do. The country was watching. People were asking if he would take the next step, if he would step into leadership on a national scale. His name was already circulating in political circles. But that wasn't why he had started this. He had started this because he saw an injustice and refused to ignore it. And now he had the power to do even more. But was he ready? His mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you decide," she said, "make sure it's your decision." Barron nodded. The future was calling. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to answer. 1 month later, a press conference was called. The world watched. Would Barron Trump step into politics? Would he take on something bigger? The cameras were on him. The reporters were waiting. Barron Trump stepped forward, looking out over the crowd, his voice steady, his purpose clear. "I didn't start this to be famous," he said. "I didn't do this for power. I did this because I saw a problem and I refused to ignore it." The audience listened intently. "This isn't about politics. It's about people," Barron continued. "And as long as people are suffering, as long as there are those who need help, I won't stop." A reporter raised a hand. "Does this mean you're running for office?" Barron let the silence settle. Then, finally, he answered. "I'm not here to play games," he said. "I'm here to change lives." The cameras flashed. The headlines exploded. Barron Trump wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. Barron Trump sat in the back of a black SUV, staring out at the streets of New York, his mind racing. A year ago, he had stood on a podium and declared his mission, to change lives, not chase power. And yet, power had come knocking on his door anyway. The world had seen what he accomplished with the Second Chance Project. Cities across the country had adopted his model. Homelessness rates in major metropolitan areas had dropped by nearly 40%. Corporations had started funding initiatives rather than pocketing tax breaks. And most importantly, people believed again. Believed that one person could make a difference. And that was why he was here tonight. His driver pulled up to the entrance of the New York Grand Hall, where thousands of supporters and political leaders were gathered. Camera crews lined the sidewalks, eager to capture what was about to happen. Because tonight, Barron Trump wasn't just a businessman. Tonight, he was about to announce something that would shake the nation. The door opened, and Barron stepped out into the roar of a waiting crowd. This was it. The stage was massive, the room packed with people from all walks of life. Former homeless individuals who had benefited from his programs, politicians who had been forced to recognize his movement, business leaders who once doubted him but now saw him as a force to be reckoned with. Barron took a deep breath as he walked toward the podium. This was bigger than anything he had done before. A hush fell over the room as he adjusted the microphone. Then he began. "I never wanted to be a politician." The words were simple, but they commanded attention. "I never wanted a title, never wanted the power that came with it. I wanted change. And when I saw that no one else was doing it, I decided to do it myself." There was a murmur of agreement. He continued, "I've spent the last few years proving that change doesn't come from speeches, it comes from action. We've rebuilt communities, given people their dignity back, and shown that real leadership isn't about sitting in an office, it's about standing on the front lines." The crowd erupted into applause. Barron took a deep breath, then dropped the bombshell. "And that's why, tonight, I'm announcing something that many have speculated about for months. The room fell silent. The cameras zoomed in. The nation was waiting. I am officially launching my campaign for governor of New York. The room exploded. People cheered, chanted his name, flashed their phones to record the historic moment. Barron stood firm, his face calm, his purpose clear. "I know what you're thinking," he said, smirking slightly. "I'm young. I'm unconventional. I don't fit the mold. Because the old ways have failed. The people in power have failed. And it's time for something new." More cheers. Barron continued, "This campaign isn't about politics. It's about people. It's about making sure no one is left behind, that no one has to suffer under the weight of a broken system. We've already started changing lives. Now, we take it further." The energy in the room was electric. Barron took a step back, looking out at the crowd. The people who had supported him believed in him. "This is our moment," he said, voice filled with determination. "This is our chance to prove that change is possible. And I promise you, from this day forward, I won't stop fighting." The crowd exploded into applause once again. And just like that, the world had its answer. Barron Trump wasn't just an activist. He wasn't just the son of a former president. He was now a contender. And the political world? They had no idea what was coming next.